Hello, everyone, and welcome to this particular section. We're going to talk a little bit about blockchain today. And the title of this section says alive and well, although if people are following the cryptocurrency prices recently, maybe that item is a bit debatable. But what I wanted to touch on today is really around certain use cases as it relates to blockchain that we're seeing in the TIBCO Labs organization. Some of the use cases that we are working on with customers and partners, some advantages and disadvantages, some of the challenges that we're seeing in these use cases. And then from there, just touch on some of the activities that we're doing within TIBCO Labs to support, again, our customers and partners as it pertains to some of these blockchain areas. So just to start and drill down a little bit, we still see blockchain, of course, as generating a lot of interest in the industry. You have a lot of new terms and use cases and some new initiatives around things like decentralized finance, Web3, the Metaverse, right? These are all topics that are definitely top of mind for a lot of individuals today. And so, and you look at the analyst reports, I mean, they're also seeing that blockchain is going to continue to evolve and grow over the next few years. And so it is still a technology that we're definitely tracking in TIBCO Labs. And definitely an area that we're very interested in and working with a number of customers and partners in. So definitely an area that we're still want to track. Now, when it comes to the use cases, there's actually a number of different areas in which we're seeing interest and questions, let's say, as it comes to TIBCO Labs from customers and partners. And the first one that I wanted to touch upon is the notion of decentralized finance. This is still one of those areas that is probably receiving a lot of attention currently. Again, even barring what's happening in the cryptocurrency space and with prices and so on. But this idea of actually decomposing traditional or more centralized financial capabilities and products into smaller reusable components is something that we still definitely see a lot of interest around. And people are really creating a lot of innovative activities around this as well. So whether it's around the idea of programmable financial products and services, how to bring that to the decentralized world, how to reduce intermediaries, reduce fees, increase the overall transparency behind a lot of these transactions, at least that's the intent in most cases. And it's a lot around improving accessibility to certain financial functions. How can we make it easier for the much broader audience to be able to do things like gain loans or other financial services? And so decentralized finance is really looking at how you can decompose traditional financial products into these reusable building blocks, compose those building blocks quickly and easily into new financial products, and then make that available to a much wider audience. And so that's the core of what we often see a lot of the decentralized capabilities around. Now, of course, there are a lot of challenges with that. You do have a lot of legal and regulatory hurdles. I mean, we've all seen in the news, different governments looking at this from different ways, trying to come up with different regulations and legal guidelines. And, how do you treat decentralized finance products as securities, and how do you tax them, and all these kinds of things come into play. And so the legal and regulatory aspects of this is obviously one of the key elements that is kind of feeding into the whole decentralized finance space. Now, the space is, as you know, largely immature and unregulated. So there are some other activities that may go on in this space that may or may not meet regulatory requirements. And there's a whole debate on what that actually might mean and how that applies. But it is relatively immature, so definitely rapidly growing. There's a lot of innovation in this space. But as a result, there are a lot of things that you also need to watch out for. And there's also the concerns around other elements such as network performance, transaction costs, hacking, short-term solution fragmentation, as it's often called. So many different solutions that they're doing the same thing but aren't necessarily tied together. So there are, of course, a lot of challenges that we need to work through, but the opportunity, I think, that presents itself here could be quite interesting. And so from a TIBCO Lab standpoint, this is definitely one of the areas that we do see interest in and get a lot of questions around. Now, just to look at it from a bit of a technical standpoint, these tend to be a lot of the building blocks behind decentralized finance. So whether you're looking at how stablecoins can form the core foundation behind a decentralized finance stack, how it can reduce volatility, let's say, in a decentralized financial set of capabilities. So how do stablecoins feed into this? How are they pegged? If they're backed by fiat, if they're backed by other cryptocurrencies or by algorithms. So that's sort of the core foundation behind all of this. And then you have all the additional layers. And so there's a lot of conversations around the different blockchain networks that would support DeFi, the different layer 2 protocols in order to facilitate performance and the way in which transactions are exchanged between different parties. That's a key element here of discussion. And then you get into, as you go up the stack, all the building blocks. So loans and deposits become part of these building blocks, which then are exposed through applications, which then may be then put through aggregators to bring all these different services and applications together. And then, of course, bring all that to the user through interfaces such as wallets, your browser, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of building blocks when it comes to decentralized finance, and a lot of innovation has to occur across each one of these in order to address some of the challenges that I mentioned on the previous slide. So again, definitely a hot topic area and something that we're likely to see more interest and innovation around. Now, the second area that I wanted to touch on, because it's also another area that we do see a lot of interest, is really around tokenization. This now starts to deal with fungible tokens, non-fungible tokens, elements of programmability. And I'm really looking at this above and beyond simply having URLs to an image that's sitting somewhere. I'm actually more looking at it from a programmability aspect of this. So this is the use of smart contracts. This is the use of being able to bring behaviors, if you will, to tokens. And really represent these tokens, whether they're application tokens, utility tokens, governance tokens, data tokens. There's a lot of kinds of tokens that are now being represented through this programmability concept. And so we want to, as TIBCO Labs, we want to make sure that we're kind of involved in this process, if you will, and helping our customers and partners understand how and where this might apply. Now, again, as there was with decentralized finance, and a lot of decentralized finance is also based on smart contracts, just like tokens are. But just like there was with DeFi, you can see a lot of these are actually the exact same concerns that we have with DeFi. You have legal and regulatory hurdles that one needs to look at and address. It's very, again, an immature space. It's largely unregulated. So you do have to watch for certain fraudulent activities when it comes to tokens and tokenization. But there's really the underlying kind of core capability here that's very interesting to the enterprise is this element of programmability. So being able to represent assets as tokens, whether they're physical or digital, and then make them have behaviors. And I think that's the piece that's actually interesting to the enterprise. And from a TIBCO Lab standpoint, again, some of the areas that which we've been working in. Now, tokens, of course, you can break these into different categories. So whether you're looking at fungible tokens, non-fungible tokens, the element of uniqueness, the element of digital scarcity, how organizations may represent certain assets as tokens, whether it's the asset as an entirety or actually start to get into fractional ownership as an example. There's a lot of elements here that the tokenization can really be applied to. And so again, the fungible token side, that's more treating it as a non-unique asset, if you will, something like Bitcoin. It's divisible. One Bitcoin's equivalent to another Bitcoin, barring the time factor and so on. But those kinds of things, yes, there's still interest in the fungible side, but obviously, as from an NFT standpoint, that's where a lot of the innovation and a lot of the enterprise interest definitely has come about. There's also a lot of interest around a variety of different use cases. And so these are just some examples of where we see this element of programmability really being applied, whether it's sports and entertainment, whether it's around real estate, whether it's around intellectual property, and of course, art and music and collectibles and those things that we're probably most familiar with. These are some of the areas in which we do see tokenization or NFTs being applied. And not only just now, but also opportunities in the future. There's also an element here of not just representing assets, but also building communities around those assets. So you can use tokenization as a way to actually represent a community and share information or allow access to certain events to only the holders, if you will, of a particular token. So it's not just about the asset, digital or physical, but it's also about the community that you can build around those assets. So a lot of interesting things going on in the tokenization space. Another one that we see is a lot of conversation around self-sovereign identity, or just generally the notion of identity, whether it's actually the identity of an individual or whether it's the identity around a thing, such as an IoT device. How can we actually put more control of one's identity back into the hands of the individual? So instead of freely giving your identity information up to umpteen different websites or to third-party providers, how can I actually retain more control over my identity, my data, and who I'm actually sharing that information with? And so you do see blockchain being injected into that conversation. Not that it's completely mandatory as it pertains to the notion of self-sovereign identity, but blockchain can be one element of it. The concepts tend to get to be much broader in that sense, but the two tend to be tied together. And so a lot of the conversations that we have at TIBCO Labs is really the application of blockchain as it pertains to self-sovereign identity. But again, it's not a mandatory piece, but it is one way in which you can achieve some of the benefits of self-sovereign identity. Now, lots of challenges in this space as well. You still, have, for example, have to issue the original credentials. So how do you make sure that that issuer is trusted and verified? So there's still an element of that has to be in this particular trust triangle, as they call it, with the issuers, holders, and the verifiers. Credentials are difficult to define. I mean, what is a credential? How do you have standards around credentials? How do you know that when you're exchanging credentials that everybody can understand them? So that's an element here that can be a challenge. And then even things like recovery. I mean, how many times do we forget our password? Well, what happens if we forget or don't have access to our wallet anymore that has our self-sovereign identity credentials inside of it? How do I recover from that? So these are some of the challenges that do exist in this space, but it is something that we do, again, see a lot of interest around. Privacy is key these days. And in terms of here, I'm talking more around privacy of the data and also privacy of any processes that you're running against that data. And so in certain cases, you're trying to figure out, well, if I'm using blockchain and I'm using blockchain as a way to distribute information to multiple participants, what level of privacy do I need? Now, this is where you get into this whole continuum of capabilities. You can be completely open and transparent, where everybody can see everything. But in certain cases, especially enterprise-related use cases, you don't necessarily want everybody to see everything. And so now you get into things like, how do I share information privately between different parties, but still do so over a blockchain network? Can I use things like zero knowledge proof to actually maintain a certain element of privacy of my data? How do I maintain privacy when I'm actually processing data? So not just privacy or encryption of the data when it's stored, not just encryption during data transport, but actually privacy and encryption while I'm processing data. And so things like trusted execution environments, homomorphic encryption, these are some of the other topics that are now starting to emerge when it comes to blockchain and the notion of privacy. Again, lots of challenges here. A lot of these concepts are new. They have yet to be widely deployed. You have issues around things like performance and just general complexity. These are not capabilities that are widely adopted and really introduced with simple point and click capabilities. There's a lot involved here. And so, this is going to be another interesting space that's going to continue to evolve and new technologies will be applied. But obviously, there's a huge focus on data privacy and on data security. And blockchain-related concepts can play a role in that. Now, another big one, and I kind of saved this one a little bit towards the end here, but Web3 and the Metaverse. And you definitely see a lot of noise, if you will, in the market around these two concepts. The two concepts aren't the same. You can have Web3 without the Metaverse, and you can also have the Metaverse without the pure definition of Web3, if you will. But definitely you have this whole notion of looking to build, I'm going to call them more decentralized services into the fabric of the internet. Now, if you take it even further, a lot of definitions will actually say Web3 is a replacement of the way that the internet currently functions. But realistically, if it actually does happen, it would be a long period of time. More likely, what you're going to see is a lot of Web3 decentralized services being incorporated into the internet and the way in which we deal with our interactions today. And so we do see a lot of work, though, being done in this space. And then how a lot of these decentralized concepts can be applied to this notion of the metaverse, this virtual world, if you will, where people can actually freely interact and engage, exchange ideas, commerce. How do I interact digitally with other individuals across this metaverse concept? And so we do see, of course, a lot of interest in this space, a lot of interest from enterprises in terms of how they can participate in this space. And so from a TIBCO Labs standpoint, there's been a fair amount of work that we're also doing in this area. If you look at the same sort of stack, I had a similar stack for decentralized finance. Web3 also has a similar stack of capabilities, if you will. In many cases, it's underpinned by a blockchain or blockchain-related set of capabilities. There's a lot of other things that sit on top of that. And so whether it's the use of oracles to provide external information into the blockchain network, the introduction and use of decentralized APIs to support the development of Web3 applications or metaverse applications, things like, again, state channels and side chains and other mechanisms that I use to try and improve performance between different parties on a network. There's a lot of capabilities here that need to be involved. And again, you're going to see a fair amount of innovation in this space going forward. So really, really excited about this space. It does present an interesting set of future opportunities. And again, the use cases are quite varied. And whether you're looking at things like product provenance, which is one of the stereotypical examples that's often used with blockchain, sort of tracking the provenance of a good or service across multiple parties, and then be able to prove that certain actions or activities did occur. So we do see still interest in that space, but the rest of it's really expanding. So whether it's, again, around decentralized finance, tokenization, the introduction of new types of programmable products and services, and it could be healthcare, it could be government, could be any number of the areas that are on this particular slide. So these are definitely all areas that we do get questions around, and we do see a lot of interest in across the board. So that's a little bit around what we see, just a quick snapshot, quick highlights, if you will, some of the hot topic areas as it pertains to blockchain. Never mind the evolution of consensus algorithms, the evolution of different types of networks, the evolution of how you actually build programmability into the network. All the technology elements here are still rapidly evolving. And that's probably a different topic for a different time. But these are some of the general kind of higher level topics that we do see that are being built on or are including blockchain into the conversation. And so that's a lot around what we are doing at TIBCO Labs. And we have a number of projects in this area. So whether you're looking at the applicability of side chains and other layer 2 protocols, how to actually facilitate enterprise transactions on those types of networks, how you can do things like analytics, how you can facilitate the development of smart contracts, how you can build digital twins using blockchain technology, or how you can even augment things like federated learning or swarm learning with blockchain capabilities. These are all areas that we're involved in or working on as part of the TIBCO Labs umbrella. And just to highlight a couple of quick projects, just kind of a slide or two on this. We have Project Dovetail, which is really bringing some of our low-code capabilities to smart contract development. So if I want to build smart contract logic through a kind of assembling a reusable set of building blocks, whether they're low-level technical building blocks or higher-level business constructs, that's something that Project Dovetail can facilitate. And so it's really bringing that low-code capability to the blockchain world and helping you build these programmable notions or the development of the smart contracts. And oftentimes, as I mentioned, you do see that in track and trace use cases. So if I'm trying to track the provenance of something or making sure that certain actions or activities are happening across multiple parties at certain points in time, I would build a track and trace solution to do so. And one of the ways in which I can facilitate the sharing of that information while maintaining a certain level of transparency and tamper-resistant nature, I would do that using blockchain technology. Now, there's always that debate around when is it appropriate versus not. Again, that's a topic for another time, but it is one possible approach to building this overall multi-party track and trace capability. And we've used Dovetail in that context to support that use case. Blockchain analytics is big. You've seen different organizations running analytics on blockchain technology. TIBCO, given its heritage in analytics, it's also something that we focused on. And so this is, for example, being able to take DeFi transactions off of something like an Ethereum network, and then taking that information, looking at the metadata, storing that into some sort of data repository, and then running rich analytics on top of that. And whether it's visual analytics, just to kind of see what's going on with certain DeFi transactions, or actually applying AI/ML against that data that's something that we've been working on in TIBCO Labs. So how can you gain insights into blockchain-derived transaction data? And then from there, there's a whole ecosystem. As organizations and as enterprises especially are looking to build ecosystems that include blockchain as part of the overall solution, blockchain is just one aspect of it. There's many different building blocks, if you will, that are required, whether it's different services and capabilities in terms of how you would integrate blockchain with the rest of enterprise applications, how you would expose that as APIs, how do you make things very event-driven or real-time, how do you move the data back and forth. There's a lot of other capabilities that we tend to see when it comes to blockchain adoption with the enterprise. And we've got some white papers around this and some further descriptions around how each of these capabilities work together. But again, it's something that as an enterprise, and again, from a TIBCO standpoint, TIBCO Labs, something that we help organizations understand where and how each one of these fits and how that ties into the blockchain ecosystem. Again, whether it's DeFi, Web3, Metaverse, and all those other concepts. Okay, so generally speaking, blockchain, some form of blockchain and blockchain-related technology still has applicability. It still has an exciting future ahead. It's going to continue to evolve. Innovation is going to continue to occur. We're still going to have to go through the hype and figure out what's real, what's not. And so, it's going to be interesting to see all the different debates and conversations go on in the industry. But there are some elements here that can definitely be applied and can definitely be useful, especially as the world moves towards much more decentralized applications, distributed interactions, and the creation of these new products in terms of making sure that the platforms that we are creating and the applications we're creating are much more open. And so, that evolution is going to continue to occur. We're still going to have to mix and match what we currently have with what some of the new and emerging concepts are. So as I mentioned, Web3 becomes maybe a set of services that are added onto the existing internet that we currently have. How much of that gets replaced remains to be seen, but you'll see this continued evolution. And then, as I mentioned, blockchain doesn't exist alone, right? It's not the magic capability that solves everything out of the box. We still are going to have to figure out how it aligns and how it mixes and matches with all the other technologies that we have out there. And so that's just a little bit around what we've seen. For people that are interested, there is a book that I will be releasing here, coming out hopefully, I think, this summer. And just to provide more background behind some of these concepts. So looking at consensus algorithms, looking at smart contracts, looking at use cases, how it pertains to the enterprise, how can we use blockchain to facilitate things like data privacy. The book will actually go into a lot of these topics in a lot more detail. So for those that are interested, feel free to check out the link that's on this particular slide, sign up for the book, and you can get notified then as soon as the book is released. Okay, and with that, just wanted to wrap things up for today. Hopefully that was a helpful quick snapshot of some of the things that we're seeing. Tons of detail behind each one of these topics, I'm sure. So each one of these could be a whole session in itself. But that's a little bit about what we're seeing, a little bit what we're doing within TIBCO Labs, and some of the fun that we're having with blockchains.